Vivid verses.
The methodology of risk assessment is not merely a profession. For me, it is a primary sensory organ. While most people navigate the world through a haze of emotion and half-formed intuition, I process life through the lens of probability, variance, and structural integrity. In my role as a senior risk analyst for a private equity firm, I am paid to identify the hairline fractures in a multi-million-dollar merger before they become catastrophic failures. It was, perhaps, inevitable that I would eventually apply this same rigorous scrutiny to the structure of my own marriage. For 5 years, my partnership with Selena had been a stable asset. She was a brand strategist with an ascending trajectory, a woman who understood the currency of optics and social positioning. Our lives were calibrated for efficiency. We lived in a custom-built colonial in the suburbs, a house that functioned with the silent precision of a luxury timepiece. We had a joint high-yield savings account that I monitored with a daily glance at the market fluctuations and a social calendar that was curated to maximize professional networking while minimizing personal fatigue. However, over the last 18 months, the data had begun to shift. The standard deviation of our interactions was widening. Selena's late nights at her creative agency, ostensibly for the Vanguard account, began to correlate less with her billable hours and more with a sudden, unexplained increase in her personal grooming expenses. I noted a 14% uptick in her expenditures at high-end boutiques and a recurring charge for a private Pilates instructor whose sessions always seemed to coincide with the hours I spent at the office finalizing quarterly reports. I didn't confront her. In risk management, you do not act on a single outlier. You wait for the pattern to solidify. I watched the way she held her phone, angled 15 degrees away from my line of sight. I noted the way she began to describe me to our mutual acquaintances, not as her partner, but as her analytical anchor. It was a subtle rebranding, one designed to frame my stability as a weight rather than a foundation. The definitive data point arrived on a Tuesday evening in late autumn. I had just concluded a particularly grueling risk mitigation session involving a mid-sized tech firm in the city. I pulled my sedan into the driveway at 7:12 p.m. The air was crisp, smelling of damp leaves and wood smoke. Two unfamiliar vehicles, a sleek European crossover and a luxury SUV, were parked near the garage. I entered through the side door, my movements practiced and silent. I am not a man who slinks, but I value the tactical advantage of being unobserved. The house was filled with the scent of a catered Mediterranean spread, roast lamb, toasted pine nuts, and lemon-infused tahini. From the dining room, I heard the rhythmic clinking of fine crystal and the cascading laughter of Selena's inner circle. I paused in the shadowed corridor of the pantry. I wasn't eavesdropping so much as I was gathering intelligence. The problem with a hedge fund brain, Selena's voice rang out, sharp and clear, is that it eventually stops being a tool and becomes a prison. Heath is quite literally incapable of spontaneity. He views our life together as a series of optimized transactions. But he provides so much stability, Selena, Aya said. I recognized the voice. One of Selena's long-term friends, a woman whose own marriage had dissolved 2 years prior under the weight of financial infidelity. Most women would kill for that kind of security. Security is just a gilded cage if you're the only one doing the flying, Selena replied. I could hear the smirk in her voice. Honestly, I've started viewing the marriage as a legacy system. It's functional for basic operations, but it's completely incompatible with my current bandwidth. He's fallen so far below my professional and social orbit that I have to spend half my energy translating my world for him. The table erupted in laughter. Is that why you've been consulting with that lawyer friend of yours? Another voice asked. I didn't recognize her. Lance is more than a consultant, Selena said. her voice dropping into a conspiratorial purr. He's an architect. He's helping me design a transition that ensures the legacy system pays out a significant exit fee before it's decommissioned. He thinks he's the only one who can calculate a payout, but he has no idea how much I've already documented. I check my internal vitals. Heart rate, 76 beats per minute. Respirations, 14 per minute. My emotional state remained flat, a calm lake in the center of storm. I wasn't hurt. I was enlightened. The variables had shifted from potential risk to active threat. I stepped from the pantry and walked into the dining room. The visual change in the room was a fascinating study in social psychology. The laughter didn't just stop, it died a violent death. Selena sat at the head of the table, dressed in a silk cream blouse that I knew cost precisely $650, a purchase she had categorized as business attire on our joint statement 3 weeks ago. Aya and the third woman, a blonde with a sharp bob, looked as though they had been caught mid-theft. The lamb is overcooked by approximately 4 minutes, I said, my voice level and dry. The fats are beginning to congeal. Selena's hand, holding a fork, trembled slightly before she set it down. Heath, you weren't supposed to be home until after 9. A common error in your modeling, I said. The consultation ended early because the client was transparent about their liabilities. It's amazing how much time you save when everyone stops pretending. I looked at the three of them. I trust the wine is helping with the bandwidth issues. Heath, don't be like this, Selena said, her face flushing with a mixture of embarrassment and rising defensiveness. This was the opening move of a gaslighting cycle. Shift the focus to my reaction rather than her action. We were just talking. Women vent. It's a social release. Venting is a randomized release of pressure, I replied, standing at the foot of the table. I didn't lean in. I didn't point. I stood with my hands clasped loosely behind my back. What I heard was a strategic discussion regarding asset liquidation and social rebranding. You call me a legacy system, Selena. It's a compelling metaphor. However, in my experience, when a system is no longer compatible with the objective, the most efficient course is an immediate hard reset. You're overreacting, Aya piped up, trying to shield her friend. You only heard a snippet of. I heard enough to calculate the trajectory, I said, turning my gaze to her. And as for you, Aya, I find it interesting that you're encouraging Selena's exit strategy when she currently owes you $15,000 for that boutique investment that went under. I assume you're hoping her exit fee covers your loss. Aya blanched. She hadn't expected me to know the exact figure. I know everything that passes through our financial ecosystem. I'm leaving, I said, looking back at Selena. I'll vacate the master suite and the house tonight. I believe that should satisfy your desire for a transition. Wait, what? Selena stood up. You can't just leave. We have the anniversary dinner for the firm on Friday. We're supposed to be there together. The optics are no longer my concern, I said. You spent the evening explaining how I am a liability to your social orbit. I am simply removing the liability. It's the most logical move. I walked out of the room. Selena's heels clicked frantically against the hardwood as she followed me upstairs. Heath, stop being so robotic. This is our life. You can't just decide it's over because I made a joke with my friends. I entered our bedroom and pulled my Toomey bag from the closet. I began to pack with a practiced, methodical efficiency. 3 suits, 5 shirts, my primary laptop, my passport, the essentials. It wasn't a joke, I said, not looking up as I folded a charcoal blazer. You mentioned a lawyer named Lance. I assume that's Lance Vance, the one who specializes in high-asset matrimonial litigation. You've been consulting with him since January. If the recurring cash withdrawals of $2,000 on the first Tuesday of every month are any indication. She stopped in the doorway, her mouth slightly agape. She had thought she was being subtle. She forgot that I track trends, and 6 consecutive months of identical cash withdrawals is a glaring trend. I was just protecting myself, she stammered. From what? Stability? Transparency? Or were you protecting the narrative you were building for your friends? I zipped the bag. It was 7:48 p.m. Total elapsed time since entry, 36 minutes. I've moved 50% of the liquid assets from the joint savings into a holding account in my name. I've also placed a freeze on the secondary credit lines. We could discuss the division of the house through our respective counsel. You're being cruel, she said, her voice cracking. You're just walking away after 5 years? I'm not walking away, I said, picking up my bag and walking toward her. She stepped back, not out of fear, but out of the sheer weight of my composure. I am accepting the terms you've already set. You declared this marriage a legacy system. I am simply agreeing to the decommissioning. Good night, Selena. I drove to a boutique hotel in the city center. The room was $320 a night, a luxury, but one justified by the need for a controlled environment. I sat at the small desk, opened my laptop, and began a digital audit of our life. My internal monologue was a steady stream of data processing. Step 1. Secure the primary accounts. Step 2. Analyze the grievance log she mentioned. Step 3. Identify the leaks in her social circle. I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. The adrenaline of a clean break is more potent than caffeine. At 2:14 a.m., my phone began to vibrate. I ignored the first 3 calls from Selena. I ignored the barrage of texts, ranging from "please come home" to "you're a monster." At 6:15 a.m., a different name appeared on the screen. Aya? I answered. Go ahead. Heath, she said, her voice sounding raw. I'm in the car. I left her place about an hour ago. She's spiraling. But that's not why I'm calling. You're calling about the $15,000, I said. Among other things. Look, she's been lying to all of us. She's been telling us you were financially abusive, that you were monitoring her every move and restricting her access to funds. She's been keeping a digital journal, a log, to show her lawyer. She's been fabricating arguments, writing down things you supposedly said that made her feel unsafe. I leaned back in the ergonomic chair. Calculated defamation, a standard tactic for securing a larger percentage of marital assets. It's worse than that. She's been recording you, Heath. Or trying to. She has a voice-activated recorder hidden in the base of that lamp in your office. She's been trying to catch you in a moment of anger for months. But you never get angry. It was driving her crazy. I smiled a small, thin line. Anger is an inefficient use of energy. Why would I provide her with the very weapon she's looking for? I have a login for her cloud storage, Aya said. She gave it to me months ago when we were working on a joint project. I can send you the log and the recordings. In exchange, I want my $15,000. I know if she goes through with this divorce, she'll blow the settlement on her rebranding and I'll never see a dime. Self-interest is the only truly predictable human emotion, I said. Send me the files. If they contain what you say they do, I will ensure your debt is categorized as a joint liability that I personally satisfy before the final split. You'll be paid in full by the end of the month. I'll send them now, she said. By 8 a.m., I was reading Selena's grievance log. It was a work of fiction that would have been impressive if it weren't so transparent. She had documented episodes of cold rage that were, in reality, moments where I had simply asked for the receipts for her Vanguard meetings. She had described my analytical nature as pathological detachment. I forwarded the entire folder to Campbell, my attorney. Campbell was a woman who shared my appreciation for precision. We met at 11:30 a.m. in her office, which overlooked the harbor. This is fascinating, Campbell said, scrolling through the files. She was setting you up for a total wipeout. In this jurisdiction, the emotional cruelty angle, combined with the financial control narrative, could have been very effective if she hadn't been so sloppy as to share her password with a disgruntled creditor. "I want the settlement finalized by Friday," I said. "I have no interest in a prolonged engagement. I want the house sold, the accounts split 50-50, and a non-disparagement clause that carries a significant financial penalty." "We could do better than 50-50, Campbell said. "With evidence of bad faith litigation and premeditated fraud, we could push for 60-40 in your favor." "No," I said. 50-50 is fair. If I push for more, she will feel the need to fight. If I give her exactly half, her greed will fight her pride, and greed will win. I want efficiency, not a trophy." Campbell nodded. "You're a cold one, Heath. But you're right." The rest of the week was a blur of high-level chess. Selena's lawyer, Lance Vance, contacted us on Wednesday. He started with a high-pressure opening, claiming that Selena was traumatized and that I had abandoned the marital home. I sat in on the call. I didn't speak until the end. "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice cutting through his legal posturing like a scalpel, "I have the cloud logs. I have the recordings of the lamp in my office. I also have a witness who is willing to testify that your client has been fabricating evidence of emotional abuse since January. If we go to court, those logs will become public record. I imagine that would be quite damaging to Selena's career as a brand strategist. Who would hire a strategist who is so easily caught in her own trap?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I'll speak to my client," Vance said, his tone shifting from predatory to cautious. On Thursday evening, I returned to the house to gather the rest of my personal effects. Selena was in the kitchen. The catered food was gone, replaced by a half-empty bottle of wine and a sense of impending collapse. "You really did it," she said, her voice sounding hollow. "You found everything." "I didn't have to find it, Selena. You left in the data. You assumed that because I was quiet, I wasn't processing. That was your primary strategic failure." "Did you ever actually love me?" she asked. It was a final, desperate attempt to pull me back into the emotional mud. I invested 5 years of my life into a partnership I believed was mutually beneficial, I said, picking up a box of books. "I provided you with stability, resources, and a foundation. You chose to view that as a legacy system to be exploited. Love, in this context, is a secondary variable that has been nullified by your breach of contract." "You're a machine," she spat. "A machine is predictable, Selena. You should have been more grateful for that. Machines don't seek revenge. They just stop working when the input is no longer valid." I left the house for the final time at 8:15 p.m. The next 3 months were a period of recalibration. I moved into a luxury apartment downtown, a space characterized by minimalist design and industrial-grade security. I threw myself into my work, overseeing the risk management for a merger between 2 global pharmaceutical giants. My mind was sharp, my focus undisturbed by the static of domestic discord. I began to realize that my marriage had been a significant drain on my cognitive resources. The energy I had spent trying to bridge the gap between Selena's social needs and my analytical reality was now being redirected toward my own growth. I was promoted to managing director. My personal net worth increased as I divested from the suburban lifestyle and invested in a diversified portfolio of emerging markets. I felt clear. In late spring, I attended a small gathering at the home of my firm's CEO. It was a dinner for the senior partners, a curated group of high-functioning individuals. I found myself standing on the balcony, looking out at the city lights when a woman approached me. "You look like a man who is calculating the structural load of that bridge," she said. I turned. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back in a practical knot. She wore a tailored black dress and carried herself with a quiet, unshakable confidence. Actually, I said, I was calculating the probability of the current infrastructure meeting the city's growth requirements over the next decade. Who are you? Claire, she said, extending a hand. I'm a structural engineer. I spend my days telling people why their buildings are going to fall down. Heath, I said, I spend my days telling people why their companies are going to fail. We talked for 2 hours. It was the most efficient conversation I had ever had with a woman. She didn't speak in metaphors or emotional riddles. She spoke in terms of load-bearing walls, tectonic shifts, and the beauty of a well-distributed weight. The problem with most structures, Claire said, is that people try to build them on hope. They ignore the soil. They ignore the foundation. Then they're surprised when the first storm brings it all down. I've recently completed a decommissioning of such a structure, I told her. Then you know the value of bedrock, she replied. We exchanged numbers, not as a romantic gesture, but as a recognition of shared frequency. Over the next few months, my life took on a new rhythm. Claire and I met for dinners that were exercises in intellectual synergy. We didn't date in the traditional sense. We conducted a series of mutual assessments. We discussed our goals, our financial philosophies, and our shared disdain for social theatrics. She was the first person I had ever met who didn't try to warm me up or break through my shell. She accepted my analytical nature as a feature, not a bug. You're not cold, Heath, she said one evening as we sat in a quiet wine bar. You're just highly filtered. Most people are overwhelmed by the noise of the world. You just figured out how to tune to the right frequency. It was the most accurate assessment of my personality I had ever heard. Meanwhile, the fallout from Selena's life reached me through the grapevine. Without my analytical anchor, her life had become a series of erratic pivots. She had tried to launch her own boutique agency, but without the financial stability I provided, she had overextended herself within 4 months. I heard she had moved into a smaller apartment in a less prestigious neighborhood. Aya, true to her nature, had drifted away once the $15,000 had been repaid. I felt no satisfaction in her decline. It was simply the logical outcome of a poor strategy. She had traded a stable, long-term asset for the short-term high of social validation, and the market had corrected itself. One Saturday morning, I was sitting on my balcony with a cup of black coffee, watching the sun rise over the skyline. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from an unknown number. I saw the news about your promotion, it read. I guess the legacy system is still running. I made a mistake, Heath. I was listening to the wrong people. Can we talk? I looked at the message for 3 seconds. I didn't feel a twinge of regret. I didn't feel the pull of nostalgia. I felt only the finality of a closed file. I blocked the number. I turned my attention back to the city. My life was now a perfectly calibrated machine. My apartment was a fortress of logic. My career was on an exponential curve. And in 20 minutes, I was meeting Claire to look at a piece of commercial real estate we were considering as a joint investment. I realized then that the legacy system hadn't been me. It had been the version of myself that tried to fit into a world that required me to be less than I was. Selena hadn't been the pilot. She had been the drag on the airframe. As I stood up to get ready for the day, I felt a sense of profound equilibrium. I had navigated the storm, not by fighting the wind, but by understanding the physics of the gale. I had maintained my frame, protected my assets, and built a new foundation on bedrock. Life, I decided, was not about avoiding risk. It was about ensuring that when the risk materializes, you are the one holding the data. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door. The world was full of variables, but for the first time in my life, I knew exactly how to solve for X. The drive downtown was smooth. The traffic patterns followed the expected Saturday morning distribution. I parked my car, checked the time. 9:58 a.m. Claire would be arriving at 10 o'clock. She pulled into the lot, at 9:59. She stepped out of her car, her movements efficient and purposeful. She looked at me and gave a sharp, knowing nod. "The site has potential," she said, bypassing the pleasantries. "But the drainage in the north corner needs a complete overhaul. The current owners are hiding the soil reports." "I've already pulled the municipal records," I said, stepping toward the building. "I know exactly what they're hiding. I've already factored a 30% discount into our opening offer." Claire smiled, a real, genuine smile of appreciation. "I love a man who does his homework. And I said, love a structure that can actually hold its own weight." We walked into the building together. The past was a sunk cost. The future was a well-managed portfolio. And as we stepped through the threshold, I knew that this time, the foundation was solid. The decommissioning was over. The new system was online, and the bandwidth was exactly where it needed to be.
Thanks for listening.